Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Live Water Roundtable event today. Today, we're going to be talking about PFAS. Thanks for joining us, the audience, and everybody else out there in social media. We're live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Today, we got some great guests that are experienced with PFAS. I'm trying to learn how to say this correctly. PFAS, they had different people saying it different ways. Mike was like PFAS, and I'm like, okay. So Mike McGill's with us from Water PIO. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And then Bill Davis, thank you from Richland County, South Carolina. Thanks for joining me. I don't know if you could hear me. And then Kyla Jacobson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Megan. You made it. Sorry about the link issue. Thanks for joining us, Megan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. I know you're out in the field on the road. You're out there working, but thanks for joining us. Now, PFAS is one of those chemical conversations, a hot topic right now. It's been in the news. It's all over social media and all these different outlets. But first, I'll have Mike give us a little introduction of yourself and what you do and how you're involved in PFAS.
Okay, so my quick resume is I started off as a news producer with CNN and DC local news for a decade, and then a former colleague of mine pulled me in the water in 2007. My first job was as the spokesperson for the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, serves about 2 million people outside of DC. Back then, 2,000 water main breaks and a $1.2 billion consent decree were our top topics, if you will. And that was easy compared to this. I've put out my own shingle in 2017 with Water PIO to help water providers across the country with their customer media and crisis comms. And so, we do overall work, we do issue specific work, and obviously PFAS and the lead and copper rule have been the issues that have really spiked here in the last couple of years. So that's what we do. Crisis communications plan, customer communications, press, social media, you name it.
Nice. Well, thanks for joining us, Mike. And Bill, you're up next. Appreciate it.
I hope you can hear me. I think I unmuted myself.
We got you.
I kind of started out as an engineer and went into water treatment first. So I was doing about 8 years of water treatment. Then I went, to doing some site development, and then about 10 years of wastewater treatment. So I went out with another consulting firm after leaving a short stint with the city of Columbia, where it's a big client of mine. And I've worked there for about 5 years. And then I went out kind of as an office manager for a local consulting firm. And one of the things I first got involved in with PFAS was kind of in 2019. It started becoming a hot topic when we got a few hits, and we saw some treatment processes coming through. And I went ahead and created a webinar seminar type thing. Back then, it was about a 4-hour. We gave 4-hour PDH, and I had people come in and talk about the health aspects of PFAS, and then I did the topic of how do we treat for PFAS, and we went in and had a day-long seminar, had everybody involved, the local government, a lot of other consultants, and a lot of local municipalities were involved in that. So that kind of sort of spiked my interest when we did that. And then now I'm running a small utility, and I have not only wastewater but water, and I've been here about 3 years at Richland County. And when I first came to Richland County Utilities, the thing that kind of struck me was we were taking over a wastewater treatment facility from an Air Force base. So you can imagine, I'm like, oh, have we tested for PFAS?
Right.
So we ended up doing a lot of testing, and we had done some previously, but it's one of the things that's kind of been on the forefront of my mind as a water provider. How is this going to affect my constituents, and how is this going to affect us as a county if we have issues?
Great. Thank you for joining us, Bill. Can't wait to hear more. Kyla, you're up next.
Okay, and I apologize ahead of time if you hear him more in the background. He's far away at the moment, so I can speak. Sorry. I started out in a water laboratory from my municipality back in the mid 80s. Worked in the lab until around 2000. Then I became the utility director. And I was actually on the Northeastern Illinois Regional Groundwater Protection Planning Committee. That's a mouthful. In 2019 or 2018, when we started talking about PFAS, and the state of Illinois started a program. They were supposed to start late fall of 2019, collecting samples from all the municipalities throughout the state. They didn't actually get started until like early spring of 2020. And then you know what happened in 2020. So they didn't actually get everything done, I don't think, until the summer of 2022. But they sampled nearly 1,500 water systems. In the meantime, and I kept up with that and the people that were doing the sampling. It was done by the Illinois EPA. Since then, I have retired from my utility, and I'm working as a trainer for the American Water Works Association out of Denver. And I do a lot of training for small systems. And one of the things that I do a lot of training on is PFAS and PFAS sampling and mitigation and the occurrence. And, what you were saying before, Mike, before the broadcast started, how everything has PFAS in it. And it's just so hard. So anyway, that's me. And I look forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear more. Megan, you're up next. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a consulting engineer in Illinois. I do some work in Wisconsin as well. And I started in the wastewater world, and I've moved more towards the drinking water world. But really, I've been taking a total water approach, leading our PFAS team at our company.
Nice. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate that, Megan. Okay, guys, I have no idea. I've done some research. I've done some, a little bit of background on this. It's not my expertise at all, and that's why you guys are here, obviously, because we need to understand this. And I'm looking at this from just a guy out there that has no idea what we're talking about. And I'm putting this together as like, okay, we're saying that inside of our house, the daily stuff I do, right? The water I intake, the drinking out of the bottle, or the pouring down into the toilet, or pouring down into the sink. I'm looking at this, they're talking about cookware, non-stick cookware being an issue. So all these things we do inside of our house, basically we pour it down the drain, it goes to the wastewater process. It's all in there. It's this chemical, right, called PFAS. So it's got to be treated. And I guess I'll start with Mike. What are some of the ways, how there's just so many different things. I don't even know where to start with this because it's such a big problem, it sounds like. So I guess on a treatment perspective, we were talking about a little bit of the treatment side. It sounds like the EPA really wants to crack down on this PFAS from getting into the environment, right? So right. Mike, what are some of the things that are going on, I guess, with the EPA right now? That I guess we'll start there.
Wow, there's a good one.
Restrictions and stuff. I don't know.
All right, let's set it all up. So, PFAS has become more and more of an issue over the last few years. Not only just a general topic, but we've had hotspots and kind of scandalous discoveries across the country. My first experience with it was way back in 2016, where PFAS were dumped into the Cape Fear River for what we found out to be 40 years. And a water plant that I was repping when I was doing utility work before I started my company, which was thought to be the best for hundreds of miles around, had PFAS running right through it and going to the customer. So, that is what the issue has become more and more. We've had hotspots, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, all over the country. And it's led to the general idea that we need to address PFAS in everything. Drinking water has become the first focus because, and I say this a lot, we are the easiest target, if you will. We don't have the staffs and legal teams to fight, and we are responsible for public safety, no matter the fact that we didn't put these chemicals in our drinking water. So right now states have come down with their own standards because there was a gap from the EPA that drinking water standards weren't being created. And now the EPA is creating and has proposed drinking water standards for the two worst of these chemicals. There's 9,000 out there in the being used across the country, but there are two worst ones, and I'll try and stay away from the acronyms too much. PFOA and PFOS, that are the worst ones that they have proposed drinking water standards for. And the standards are at such a low level that they could throw thousands of water utilities into an immediate need for drinking water treatment when those standards go into effect. So that is kind of a basic landscape of the challenge for public water systems. Because as these standards get put in place, and we'll talk more about those standards, there's going to be an incredible crunch on getting these treatment systems together so that it can be used across the country. There are three main ones: granular activated carbon, reverse osmosis, and ion exchange, which prove to work differently in different places in some degrees. They're expensive, and our customers are going to have to pay for them because polluters are not being forced to pay. They're not kind of the first target here. We work with some utilities that are getting water plants built because they have sued and have reached confidential settlements. But on the whole, the nation's water customers are going to be paying for cleaning up contamination that we in public water did not cause.
Wow. So, Bill, going off of what Mike was just saying, what are some of the insights you've had with, challenges with the EPA and things like that for the restrictions, I guess, that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, I think I can speak from a small utility standpoint. My utility is an enterprise fund. So what Mike's saying makes perfect sense because every single thing that I have to put back into my system comes back to the customer because that's the only place other than grants, which are very limited. I know we've talked about this in other venues here, you and I have, Chad, but when you start looking at the cost share from the federal government on the water treatment and wastewater systems, we're talking about going from the 60s back right before the Clean Water Act came out. We were talking about a 60-some% share of the market being federally assisted. Now we're talking about like 5. Right. Even with some of this influx, the number is extremely low. So from my perspective, every single thing that I put back into the system that I don't get assistance with, these unfunded mandates that we're seeing coming from the EPA and other places, it's easy to say, yeah, let's just treat it down to non-detect. But it's another thing to build a system and build it quick enough to get that taken care of. And I think that's where I almost feel like we're getting ahead of the game a little bit. I still think, even though it's been 3 or 4 or 5 years, even back to 2016, what Mike was saying, I feel like we're jumping too fast, too furious, and not focusing on some of the other issues like the cause and how do we mediate those causes. They come back on us now. We should be able to get some assistance with it, with these unfunded mandates.
You would think. So, Kyla, off of what Bill and Mike were saying, what is your perspective on all that?
Well, I mean, we just got done and we're still not done dealing with the lead issue and, all the changes that are coming with that. That's a discussion for another day. But now we have to deal with PFAS and we'll talk about this, with regards to the regulations, but, and where are they going to set it? It's kind of a moving target there. There's a health advisory level currently that's 70. Illinois EPA was looking at 2, and they were targeting any system that tested higher than 2 while there was no regulation set. But they said if you're higher than 2, you need to go and notify your consumers that this is above this level. Now they're saying the standard may be 7. So, but which is still incredibly small. And the cost for treatment is going to be exorbitant for most systems, especially small systems who I work with a lot right now. And, what I've done a couple of cost analysis, and we found that finding an alternate source of water may be cheaper than implementing some type of treatment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which is a terribly expensive ordeal as well. But, it's these, as Bill said, unfunded mandates, and we didn't pollute it. We didn't put it there. It's not something we're putting in the water. It's something that's in the source. Wow. And we have to deal with it.
That's cool. Megan, you're up next. Sorry. With everybody's input, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page here. What I've seen is that federally we're getting $10 billion for through the Infrastructure Act, specifically for emerging contaminants. And most reports have said that's not going to be enough. So we are likely going to need to pursue other avenues like looking at the polluters, getting funding that way, or other types of consolidation or ways to fund these projects just to make it feasible, because we obviously want to protect public health, but we're also facing all these other challenges.
So from what everybody's saying here is basically we have no money to fix what they want us to fix, which is resolve the PFAS getting into the system, right? And it's something that we are creating. It's the private sector's creation of packaging and materials and cookingware, and it's in everything, right? And that's really what it comes down to. So we're trying to regulate something at a really low parts per million, right? That is kind of sounds like it's unsustainable, right?
Parts per trillion and parts per quadrillion, even with the new health advisories. Yeah.
Like that's super low, right? I mean, that seems ridiculous low. So anyway, just my now. So I'm trying to take this all in, right? So okay, so we have this big problem. We have no money, and we're being forced to lower our standards, of parts per million down to trillions or whatever, that's going to look like. How are we going to be able to actually do that? I mean, is it even possible? Like, Bill, I think you wanted to chime in there. What?
Yeah, I got a quick little, I like to do practical things. I know I know Mike and I know each other pretty well, but he does a lot of this too. So I took a recent testing of a well-known ketchup brand, and the ketchup tested actually 12 parts per million, not trillion. And if you took a single tablespoon of this ketchup at 12 parts per million, and you compared it to how much drinking water would I have to drink at 4 parts per trillion to make up the same amount of PFAS I would be getting in the tablespoon of ketchup. Well, it comes out to 11,720 gallons, or 213 55-gallon drums, if you want to put it in perspective. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's, and you just made a point that ketchup is worse than what is in the water.
Right.
Like, literally.
Exactly.
Okay, so why are we getting regulated? Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Well, going back to what I said, I mean, the EPA and the FDA, I say this, if 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS and the new hazard index, which I didn't even mention, come into play, they need to be standing in front of a camera tomorrow telling the public that you need to get rid of everything you own that has PFAS in it. This shirt I'm wearing, the chair I'm sitting in this hotel, the carpet I'm walking on, the cookware I use, the cosmetics I put on my face when I get, a blemish before I go on the air. Everything, everything's got PFAS in it. And if these are the levels in water, then they need to be standing out front and saying this has to go in everything we own. But they won't do that because they know they'll be laughed out of the room. So public water is kind of the first battleground, if you will, and we're kind of forced to take whatever we get. When the parts per quadrillion interim health advisories were announced last year, they're so absurdly low, we can't even test for them reliably. And EPA said, well, we'll give you some messaging help. And, because I'm a comms person, I was like, wait a second. And the messaging is that no matter, even if you have a non-detect, you could have PFAS levels in your water that are unsafe. That's basically so every single water provider in the country, even if they don't have PFAS in their water, could be accused of having it in there at unsafe levels. It's just untenable, but this is what they've decided to do so they can achieve other goals when it comes to getting PFAS out of products, which is what we need. Really, the focus should be getting it out of the sources, getting it out of our drinking water sources and getting it out of our products. But first they're coming at drinking water with these absurd levels that we can't meet or are going to cost billions of dollars in advanced treatment. Real quick, I've got a client that's under 4 parts per trillion for PFAS. They're okay right now. But with drought, what we discover is that there are spikes in PFAS numbers. This is an annual running average. So those spikes could force them over 4 parts per trillion for their annual running average. This one utility, it could cost them $1 billion, just this one utility, to put advanced treatment on their water if they spike and go over 4 for their annual average. That's how absurdly low these standards are.
So Mike and Kyla, you're next. So you're talking about 1 trillion gallons of water. Is that what we're talking about?
$1 trillion just for one utility.
$1 trillion?
For one utility to if they spike over it. And when we talk about parts per trillion, that's the minute level that the standards are being set at.
So parts per trillion, Chad.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just make sure everyone understands
Just how small does a part per trillion? I got this one tidbit, and somebody have to fact check it. But 1 part per trillion is like 30 seconds every million years.
Yeah, we use time, distance, and volume. Time, 1 second in 32,000 years. 1 second in 32,000. Distance, it's the first 6 inches on a trip to the sun. And then for water, it's 1 drop of water out of 14 million gallons of water. That's the calculation. But there are a lot of other ones out there. But basically, it's such a minute level. Now, listen. Some of these chemicals at higher levels, like 200, 300, 400 parts per trillion, can be issues. We've seen these hotspots, but we're talking about 4 parts per trillion, not 400. And that's the catch here. We don't have the proof yet to say, listen, you've got to get the 4 parts per trillion. And if we're saying we do, then it needs to come out of every product tomorrow.
Right. Kyla, what would you like to add to this one?
Well, going back on that, because it's so pervasive on our environment, yes, my shirt, Gore-Tex. People love their Gore-Tex outerwear. It's full of PFAS. And we're not taking the PFAS. And when you sample it, there's such a risk of cross-contamination just because of the volatility and, what you may be wearing, what you may have put on your hands, what cosmetic. It's absolutely ridiculous. So, not only when you sample it, they have the bottles that you collect, but there's also a trip blank where you have to pour from one container to another so that it's experiencing the same environmental conditions as your sample, because they're going to be contaminated. And then, leaving the sampling, and I'm not picking on water utility people, but they're not lab people. And you're going to ask, right now we already know we have challenges and problems collecting our lead and copper samples because we're having people that are not lab staff collecting those samples. Now we're going to have operators who don't understand the complexness of this compound, and they don't understand how to do the sampling. It's going to create a nightmare because there's going to be detects all over the place because it's so pervasive in our environment.
Yeah, wow. This is way blowing my mind right now. I don't even know. I got so many questions, but I'm trying to organize them in my head.
It's a fun conversation, right?
This is nuts. Megan, sorry, you jumped off there. I don't know if you missed some of the conversation, but do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I caught the tail end there with the sampling procedures, and the EPA has released a list of everything you're not allowed to bring with you when you're sampling. So you can't wear deodorant. You have to have washed your clothes without fabric softener so many days before you're collecting those samples. You can't bring a plastic clipboard. You can't use a Sharpie to mark your sample bottle. This long list of things where just the tiniest thing can create a detect because these sampling levels are so incredibly low, around 2 parts per trillion, depending on the kind of PFAS you're sampling for. So it is something you have to be extremely careful about, and creates a lot of problems for water and wastewater utilities when sampling.
Right. And I don't think the water and wastewater operators are going to care that much.
And I'll say this, on the public story side, we see activists taking water samples, and all of a sudden, your area becomes the hottest in the country for PFAS. It's because they aren't following those rigorous sampling schedules. And I see this coverage generated all the time. We just saw another story a couple of weeks ago. An activist down in southeastern North Carolina, I know, is not following proper protocols. And somehow southeastern North Carolina still ends up being the top in the country when I know we're not. But it's because of that. And this is where the communications piece comes in. We have to be out front talking about this early and often so that we are providing that information. So when stories like that come in, we can talk about them. That's not the first thing that they're hearing. The first thing they're hearing about this is from us as the water provider. And that helps kind of blunt and give perspective on the entire issue. Otherwise, if we're not out front talking about this right now because it's not comfortable to talk about, we're not having a lot of fun here talking about this. If we don't go first, and they'll get their information from elsewhere, they'll come to us, and we'll be on the defensive about an issue that we're not at fault for. Like you said earlier, we didn't put it there. We're left to get this out of our water. It's going to cost money, and we're going to be the people that are going to be turned to and said, you shouldn't be charging us for this. It's your fault. Well, it's not. But if we're not communicating first about this, that's where the customer will in some cases rightly go to, because we haven't been talking to.
So,
Yeah. Hey, so does anybody use Post-it note? Can I use one of these Post-it notes? Oh, wait a minute. A recent test said that there's 20 parts per million on Post-it notes. So maybe not.
This is okay, guys. This is nuts. I had no idea it was going to go this direction. So, I mean, this is just blowing my mind, because this is something that we can't control at all. Right. If you try and filter out the PFAS in the system, it's still going to be potentially, contaminated, getting false readings. You're going to end up putting more restrictions on yourself if you mess this up. I mean, and like you said, Kyla, is if they don't understand how to do lab testing correctly, it's just going to make things worse. I mean, this is crazy, like literally.
You don't think the river keeper knows how to do sampling?
Well, I'll say this: the river keeper down in southeastern North Carolina. Actually, you can find some good ones out there, because if you're communicating with your river keeper, which utilities should be doing, then the river keeper knows it's not your fault. It's the polluter upstream.
We've got a good one too. I was just making general stuff.
Yeah, I just want to throw that out there.
Firefighter foam. So Bill, your siting of your utility, that's like a nightmare right there.
I was scared to death.
St. Paul, Minneapolis, up there on the Mississippi River. And I'm not picking on 3M, but 3M, hello, Scotch Guard. Mm-hmm. And the discharge from that, and I mean the rivers, the wells, everything that's along the Mississippi River is just loaded with those compounds because of where it comes from.
You can pick on 3M. They've announced they know there's a problem. They've announced they're cutting back production of the PFAS. But guess what? The company Chemours, which was the one that dumped into the Cape Fear River, they're an offshoot of DuPont. So DuPont and Chemours were dumping for 40 years. When 3M announced they were cutting back production, Chemours announced they were going to ramp it up.
Nice.
It's a $1 billion moneymaker. They're being sued right now by utilities in southeastern North Carolina, and they didn't care for 1 second about that lawsuit when they announced to the world, we're ramping up production. It's a problem that's just not going to go away for us, and we're left to deal with it.
Sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
This is a good one. So industrial pretreatment is like a real thing. Why aren't we enforcing industrial pretreatment on these companies like 3M when they're discharging and stuff like that? They should have standards of just like we are in utilities. Why don't we do that?
Jump in there, Megan.
Yeah, that's yours.
Yep. At the end of 2022, EPA released a statement providing guidance to publicly owned treatment works on how to create a pre-treatment program for PFAS. Right now, these are not they're not enforceable, so they're not required to do this yet, but it's looking like they will be. The other thing is that states are looking at putting PFAS in the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. So that's what tells a wastewater treatment plant or other people who are discharging, can we discharge this to a water body? And it sets limits for what they can discharge. So those limits, PFAS are getting added to those. I know Wisconsin has added them. Illinois is looking at adding them. Those are the states I operate in. I'm sure other states have done so as well.
Well, and unfortunately, I mean, it's good, but it's kind of like closing the barn door after the horses are out, because the damage has kind of been done, because a lot of these aquifers are now contaminated with PFAS, and there's no way to get that out.
Yeah, and I've talked about this for a few years. I've been on panels with the Taft law firm, which is Rob Balot's law firm, which really came down on DuPont on PFAS and is the subject of the movie Dark Waters. And I've said this on those panels. The unintended consequence of those actions is that wastewater utilities are going to be the first people sued, because technically we're going to be a polluter under these regulations. And because we don't have the legal teams to fight, we don't have the staffs to fight, and we're technically a polluter, we're going to be the easiest people to beat in court. And so we've said this before, we're going to be sued left and right, and they won't want to take us to court. They won't want to spend the time or money. So they'll say, here's our number for settlement, write us a check, because if we take you to court, we're going to win, and we're going to win for more money. So here's your settlement offer, sign this offer. And that's very much the landscape that we could be looking at, even though these regulations that Megan talked about are right and proper.
Right.
The problem is we're technically going to be a polluter if it goes through our plants and back into our waterways.
But
so it's problematic. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it's a double-edged sword, because now we're a polluter and we're going to be fined. But if we make some type of treatment, the cost of that is exorbitant. So, one way or the other, the consumers are going to be paying the bill for this, and they need to understand, again, this is not something we created. So when your water bill goes up 1,000%, that it's because we're having to fix a problem that we are being forced to fix that we didn't create.
Well, you start looking at treating wastewater. You're talking about, I'll let Megan speak to that. She's the expert, but I think you start talking about treating wastewater for PFAS, you're talking about a whole nother animal. That's right. And you're talking about a totally unsustainable methodology, because you're gonna foul anything you put in there with this wastewater. So I like the idea of having a pre-treatment requirement, but on the wastewater side, where do we wash these shirts? Where do we wash the knife that we cut the however many parts per 17? What did you say? It was 17,000 parts per trillion in the chocolate cake,
17,000 parts per trillion chocolate cake. Yeah. Right.
So, it's all going to the wastewater system. And again, we didn't create it. We're trying to treat it for other standards, but now we're having to deal with PFAS that was, imposed on us as a wastewater facility.
Yeah.
So,
and Megan, I wanted to learn a little bit more about the wastewater treatment stuff, but we're talking about phosphorus, ammonia. We had to reduce all that at these wastewater treatment plants. We had to, innovate these wastewater treatment plants just to take care of that, because a lot of that was coming from agriculture, just off the land and going right into the system. So, Megan, can you speak a little bit more about the treatment process? Like, how are we going to, filter this out?
Yes, there's still a lot of research to be done on treatment on the wastewater side. I'll put that out there. What it seems to be is PFAS likes to stick to organic materials, so it's coming out in the biosolids. I don't know what limit we're looking at for the water effluent side of it, so but that has not been as big of a concern. But with biosolids, the main form of treatment you're looking at is actually incineration. Which creates a whole host of other problems.
That's right.
Very
just increased our carbon footprint.
Increases the carbon footprint. It also has the potential, if you're not incinerating at a high enough temperature, of releasing PFAS into the air. Then you're also looking at having some kind of system to treat the air coming off your incinerator. So there's a lot out for debate there as well. And I wanted to touch on one other topic that was mentioned previously, with wastewater treatment plants being the subject of lawsuits. So one good news on the wastewater and water treatment side is that just last month, EPA has said, they have not put it in writing yet, that publicly owned treatment works, water treatment, and landfills are not going to be subject to the Superfund Act. So they won't have to do the cleanup, or they won't be responsible for cleanup at their sites. I know I feel like I should knock on wood.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I heard that as well. That's one of those where I'll believe it when I see it, because
Yeah.
but it's at least it's being talked about, because a couple of years ago it didn't look like we were going to get an exemption at all. Certainly in the legislation that was moving through Congress, it didn't look like we were going to get it. So yeah, there is, once again, cross the fingers.
So there's really, man, just trying to wrap my head around all this again is just there's no real way to treat it yet. I mean, economically, there's no way to like filter it out of the system to get to the parts per million that the EPA is kind of focused on at this you said what, 4 parts per trillion? Per
Yes.
trillion, which is, like Bill just pointed out, the ketchup has way more in a tablespoon of ketchup in it than we need to be at 4 parts per trillion, for example. So why do you think they're putting this hard restrictions on it and not focus on where these sources actually coming from, the private sector? Is there any ideas of that? Go ahead.
Well, the EPA has a roadmap. I mean, the roadmap's big, and it's just like a map. I mean, there's a lot of paths that the Biden administration is going to take to try to achieve this, and we're just, like Mike said, we're the low-hanging fruit. Water and wastewater treatment is already regulated very heavily, easy to impose new regulations for us, and that's why we're being hit first. But there's a lot more coming. It's not going to be over. If you look up the blueprint from the Biden administration, you'll see that Michael Reagan has talked about what they're planning on doing. It's about a 50-page document, not too heavy of a read, but pretty good information.
I just want to go back to something that you said, Chad, earlier, when we were talking about wastewater and getting stuff out of the wastewater, and you mentioned phosphorus and nitrogen and how the farmers apply that and it washes out, it ends up in the streams. And just FYI, they don't regulate that.
Yeah.
That's not regulated. So, and there are reasons why that stuff is applied, and I get it. And I know in Illinois, many agencies are working with the ag community, trying to minimize that and keep, if they're going to put that on their fields, to keep it in, on their fields and not have runoff. But I'm just saying, now we've got something else that we're going to be concerned about, and the people upstream of us aren't concerned about it, but now we have to deal with it.
I looked up something really interesting because of the lead stuff that was going on with water. And then I looked up about the PVC pipes that we're putting in the ground. And I'm thinking, well, we got PFAS everywhere else in our houses. Well, what's the PVC pipe like? And there's not a lot of information out there, but I did find one link that actually was a lawyer. It was a law firm talking about PVC pipe having PFAS in it.
I would think.
Right. That's what I was like. Okay. Well, so what happens then? We're putting in all this infrastructure with PVC pipe and stuff like that. I mean, it gets laughable and it's not funny, but it's the point.
And on the customer product side, the latest story a couple of weeks ago was that it's being found in toilet paper.
Yeah.
If you want a way of putting in our wastewater systems that it's not like we can treat it in our drinking water, it's going straight into our wastewater system, straight from all of us. The findings in toilet paper, you just kind of looked at, you looked up into the sky and you're like, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
It's we're fighting a losing battle. As Kyla said, the barn, the horse is out of the barn. We lost the opportunity to get ahead of this, and now we have to play catch up. And unfortunately for us in water and wastewater, as Bill said, we are the low-hanging fruit. So we are the first people that are going to be made to catch up with this. Cost be damned.
That's right.
And when EPA said it was only going to cost $9 billion, or they had $9 billion available to take care of PFAS across the country, it was just a joke, but they tossed it out there like, oh, don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. We got $9 billion. the number, AWWA came out with a number $337 billion, I think was their estimate. And we're dealing with people that, and this is what's been caused by Flint. I talk about lead and PFAS a lot. I do a lot of lead work. And there's the Flint effect. The Flint effect carries over on the PFAS.
Mm-hmm.
It's people automatically think it's apples to apples. It's apples to kumquats, but it's a water quality concern. And the belief is, you've got something in my water I shouldn't be drinking. You need to get it out, and it's on you to pay for it, not me. The customer. You should be the ones getting it out. So when those bills come due, the blowback's going to be on the water utility, not necessarily on the polluter, because the polluter isn't being the one targeted right now. It's us. Right. So that's the public communications piece that we preach. You've got to be talking about it, even though we in water and wastewater don't like to talk about unknowns. We don't like to talk about things that haven't been decided yet. We have to here. We have to get out front so that the customer will trust us as the protector of public health that did not cause this problem in the first place.
Right.
And that's going to be essential for us. Go ahead. Sorry.
Let's go back and, you said talking PFAS and lead in the same context, not the same context. Okay. Right. Get the lead out of my water. Well, guess what? My water doesn't have lead in it. I'm sending it to your house and it's lead free.
That's right.
You're the person polluting it.
Oh, yeah.
I know. I get it. I'm just using that as an example.
Obviously,
I have to make my water such that it's not corrosive, that I'm not adding to the problem. I get that. But I'm just saying the water that leaves my treatment plant is lead free.
That's right.
So
true.
Sounds like a business opportunity. Bottle that up and sell it without.
Exactly.
Well, here's a fun little note where the new PFAS health advisories actually help us out when it comes to people saying bottled water is the safe alternative.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not anymore, because if your bottled water has a non-detect for PFAS, according to the EPA, it still can have PFAS in it at unsafe levels. Right. So in a way, they took a whack at bottled water at the same time they were taking a whack at us. I have a story after yours, Kylie. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, but technically bottled water does not have to follow the same drinking water regulations. Bottled water is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, for packaging and source, period. Now, the more scrupulous water bottlers are going to have their water tested, but they don't have to. They do not follow drinking water regulations.
Well, they don't want to either, because if they have hits for PFAS, what we saw in Massachusetts, a 60-year-old bottled water company came in the 30s at parts per trillion level for PFAS. They were pulled from the shelves, and that company died in about 3 months.
Right.
But you talk about FDA and how it's a packaged product. EPA doesn't care. They've put that message on their website that bottled water is an alternative source. Tell you a quick story. I had a client pulled me in Vermont because a regulator there was making them put out a public notice at 3 parts per trillion for one PFAS chemical in only half their samples. Even though the state regulation was 20 parts per trillion and they were at 3, the regulator saw the health advisory levels in the parts per quadrillion level and said, you've got to put out a public notification. We went back and forth on that. We ended up putting it out in such a way that the public didn't panic. But the one thing the regulator insisted go into our public notification was that bottled water was safe. And I was just like,
wow.
So that shows you how much of a Wild West it can be already, and how much wilder it's going to get when we do get these standards to come down and be put.
Well, it shows me how lack of education is happening in the upper, government. I mean,
I won't say it's a lack of education. They decided in that moment, I've got something I can use to come down on water utilities. I'm going to make this utility my example. No, it was more of a power thing than anything else. Dealing with that regulator, that individual regulator, wasn't an education thing. He saw an opportunity. That EPA gave him the opportunity by setting those health advisories at a level we can't even test for. And said, I've got you.
Well, that's what Illinois did. Everybody that had a 2 had to put out public notice. But what Chad's saying is the education is educating the people to say that bottled water is not the panacea.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
just
that
think
could
about,
be
think about bottled water. Okay, we're drinking the bottled water, we're peeing in the toilet, and where's it going? Hello,
Yeah,
it's
right.
not rocket science.
Well,
I mean, seriously. Go ahead, Mike.
it does depend on the type of treatment of bottled water. Like I know, like some of the larger ones, like she's talking about, are actually doing reverse osmosis or other things.
right.
Sure.
But these other ones that are just taking the groundwater or taking the surface water that's already been treated and then putting some minerals in it, it's the same water.
Right.
You know, same thing.
And I've done tours at my treatment plant for 30 years. And I always tell students, I'm like, because they talk about bottled water. And I said, it's not regulated. I said, if you had a pond in your backyard that had crystal clear water, you could fill bottles. And as long as the label was proper, according to the FDA, and nobody got sick, you could make $1 million selling your bottled water out of Joe's pond.
Well,
I mean,
I wanted to ask you a question, Kyla. So on the testing, what have y'all seen for the testing of PFAS and the cost of that testing? Have you seen it per sample?
I don't know. I haven't seen.
Megan knows.
Yeah, Mike's got his hand up. Yeah, I just
Megan, you go first.
To me, the cost per sample, and I'll be curious to hear what that is negligible compared to the personnel problems with sampling. So go ahead,
Exactly.
Megan.
All right. So that's the primary problem. But when you add up all the collecting costs and all the management costs and all the other costs that are associated, it's somewhere around $400 to $500 per test. So now you're talking about this new rule where it's saying that the water companies are going to have to test quarterly unless they can prove that, or unless they're less than 10,000 gallons. I mean, 10,000 customers, they'll have to do twice. But if you just took 4 samples per year per water company, that's $2,000 just for the 4 samples. That's assuming they do it right. And then you've got these numbers need to be fact checked too, but according to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, about 150,000 public drinking water. So if you look at all those companies and you look at all that testing, we're talking about $300+ million a year if you can find a company that tests it according to the EPA in your area.
And I'll talk about that, but I'll let Megan go first.
Yeah, sample costs I've seen as high as $800 per sample.
Wow.
So even higher than the 500. But I've also heard as low as 300. But the other problem is lab capacity right now.
That's right.
That's right.
These labs have to be accredited by the US EPA, and not all of them are accredited yet. They're working on that. And I am working with the community in Wisconsin who is requiring sampling right now. They're saying don't test until the end of your testing period because we can't even take it because they won't have this feasibility until later this year.
So I have a client that's dealing with notices of violation right now because their firm made errors on their tests. They got behind the 8 ball. They missed their testing windows. They didn't handle them properly. They didn't test properly, and the utility gets the 3 NOVs. What we're seeing is, this is the other component about this whole mess: money. Let's talk about money.
Fine.
So larger testing companies are buying up smaller testing companies. We are seeing monopolies being created on the testing side, and then they're going to be able to set their price and their time frame as they see fit, because you're going to be stuck with it. Like Megan said, I mean, and we're seeing that problem already, let alone we've got UCMR 5 coming. And Chad, you might not know this. This is a regulation where every water utility over 3,300 people has to test for 29 PFAS chemicals between now and 2025. And that's the testing window Megan was applying. So we're going to be doing all these tests for all this money with fewer and fewer firms able to do it and do it properly and on time. And then we're going to create all this data that we won't have standards for, that we're going to be out there in the public and have to explain. It's just going to be chaotic. I wish I wasn't such a gloom and doom. I say this at speeches I give. I'm the angel of death when it comes to a company. But it's true. We have to get out front of all of this. And going through my communications piece, because we know we've got all these challenges coming. That's why we got to talk about it now, because when those problems hit, if the first thing that the public hears about are the problems and not what we've been trying to get ready for, we're going to get hit. And judging by the people on this panel, we're public servants trying to do our best to continue to deliver safe, quality, high quality service to everybody. But we will be the first people pointed at if something goes wrong if we're not out front on this.
I mean, this is, I'm wrapping my head around this. Like I keep saying this constantly because it's just so much, but it really is a terrible situation for the end users, which is the constituents within these communities that are going to have to pay. Their water bills are just going to go crazy, like Kyle said earlier, because someone's got to pay. Someone's got to pay to keep it up. But my thing is like, okay, well, why wouldn't the private sector with all these massive companies with billions and billions of dollars not start looking at helping us do this? I mean, it's, then you start looking at the way things are being done. Yeah, exactly. You got money. You're telling me that they want bottled water. They want you to basically promote bottled water instead of drinking water. Local drinking water is bad, and they want you to promote bottled water, which is funding the private sectors more. They control that. This is where this system is getting crazy. Like, it's uncontrollable. I mean, it's kind of crazy that we're even having these discussions, and we're the ones that have to have it because apparently someone doesn't hear us up at the top yet. So it's amazing.
We're the front line. We're the front.
Yeah, we're always. Yeah, go ahead.
Chad, I'd really be interested in hearing what Megan has to say about, like, what is a good number for folks to use when you're talking about treating 1 million gallons? Like on an average, what are we looking at? Like if we were putting a GAC or some other system in, what are we looking at cost wise?
Yeah.
So what I've heard the average is, and this doesn't take into account treatment size, is $40 million for a treatment system.
For 1 million?
I think it's around the 1 million gallon size. It's an average across the board.
So wait,
I've seen so many numbers. I mean, it's just crazy.
I was going to say there's a couple utilities in Illinois that we've done opinion of probable cost, and it's like $13 million. It's about $2 million per MGD.
I'll just say this. So down here in Wilmington, North Carolina, southeastern North Carolina, Cape Fear region that was affected by the Gen X scandal discovery, if you will, back in 2017. 3 water systems, the most directly effective, have gone with surface water RO, which was a mistake, but they went with it, groundwater RO, and GAC. Don't say GAC, GAC. Yeah, because the customer hates GAC. But so the total cost for those 300,000 people to clean their water of this PFAS is $250 million. For those 3 facilities to be built for those 300,000 people, we're talking $250 million. So
what's the cost share? I mean, that's a big cost share per person.
Oh, sure. The way it's working, so the one utility that was in the middle of the scandal, CFPUA, they put in GAC $43 million worth. I'll tell you a funny story in a second. And the customer bills have already gone up $5 a month. Radhika Fox, the assistant administrator for water, announced her new health advisories at CFPUA's new facility, GAC facility. And I had a reporter in the room ask her, because I was at ACE presenting on lead. I had him ask her, she's walking through a plant that can't even meet her new health advisories. And it couldn't. It couldn't meet her new health advisories, even though she was showcasing this plant as the way to go to deal with PFAS. That's how crazy it is. I have her on tape if anybody wants to use it. But she said, oh, these health advisories aren't drinking water standards. Test for parts per trillion. If you find it at parts per trillion, then you do something about it. So she threw her health advisories out the window in a heartbeat, but they're still there on the website that says if you have water that's a non-detect, you still could have unsafe levels of PFAS. So that's the world we live in right now. It's just a mess.
Yeah.
And the other item sorry, Chad.
No, go ahead.
The other item that's going to add to cost is the ongoing maintenance of these systems. They're much more expensive systems to operate. And when you're looking at GIC and ion exchange, you can normally regenerate those resins Give me just a second. You can normally regenerate those resins, but when it comes to PFAS, we can't regenerate them because you're just introducing more contamination.
Yeah, there's the CFPUA's plant. There are only 3 facilities in the country that they can take their GAC to get it regenerated. So they're in the middle of that process right now. There's only 3 in the country. So imagine what's going to happen when all of these utilities need to put on GAC onto their water. First off, there's not going to be enough carbon made to do that. But then you look at the downstream, like you talked about, Megan, that one facility, it's $3 million a year in operational costs for that facility. That's also being passed on to the customer. But then you have the sheer limited facilities, they're set. In some ways, the people have gone through the mess already, that have been in trouble already, if you will. They're actually in better shape than the people in water who haven't had an issue. Because go ahead,
Mike,
Bill.
Just talk about that, the GAC, however you want to acronym it. When you look at that, Megan, I know the regeneration comes when it fouls. So it fouls because the adsorption, it also is extremely dependent on the level of other things that could foul that granular activated carbon. So once that thing gets fouled, if you don't have testing on the other end, and I don't know what I was going to ask her about that. The testing on the backside of the GAC is going to do what? I mean, how are you going to know when it's old? You got a timer on it or what?
Yeah, so they'll perform what's called breakthrough testing. So they'll look at when they start to get positive PFAS samples on the downstream end of that treatment system.
So more testing.
More testing.
And we have seen CFPUA is going to be the facility down in North Carolina. They're going to be really a bellwether. They're doing tests on the contact time, their rotation, how they have to operate, and what they find is really going to be a national set a national standard almost on how much contact time is needed and how often you have to regenerate, swap out and regenerate. So that's coming. They're doing their first swap out right now here in April.
Wow, this is intense, guys. Wow. I mean,
And it's just the surface, Chad.
I know, we're just
getting started.
Yeah, this is. I mean, look, I had a list of a bunch of stuff to go over. We're not going to get to all that, obviously, so we'll have to have another conversation about this. We didn't get into health effects and all the alternatives and remediation, all that stuff. But that's another conversation. This is a good place to just start giving people perspective, like me, who don't really understand it, like you guys do. You get it. You're in the trenches. You're every day. You're getting a glimpse of what this is causing in our society. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I wish we had more time to keep going over this. This is a great episode. My mind's going to be crazy all night tonight thinking about this thing. But if we'll do the exit, Mike, give us how can people get a hold of you and that kind of stuff, and then we'll go through everybody else.
So easy. We're always on call because we deal with water crisis communications as well. You can reach me at mike@waterpio.com. We have a 24-hour line, 910-622-8472. You can text or call anytime, day or night. We're at work all over the country, especially on the PFAS issue. So mike@waterpio.com or 910-622-8472.
Thank you, Mike, for being here. Bill?
Yeah, you can find me most commonly on LinkedIn. You just look for Bill Davis, Richland County Utilities. You can also reach me by email at davis.bill@richland, RICHLAND, county SC as in South Carolina, .gov.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. Kyla?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn as well. There is another Kyla Jacobson. She actually works for Esri.
Oh.
So kind of in the water industry.
In the water industry.
But she's a lot younger than I am, and I happen to know her. But anyway, Kyla Jacobson, and I do work for American Water Works Association. So my email address is my first initial last name, K Jacobson, SEN, @awwa.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyla. Go ahead, Megan.
Yep, I'm on LinkedIn as well. It is very difficult to find me because of my name being shared with a celebrity. So Megan Fox at Baxter and Woodman. That usually helps people find me. And then my email is my first initial M, Fox like the animal at baxterwoodman.com.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thanks, Megan. Thank you all for being here. This is so enlightening. My brain is just gone for today. So I look forward to reaching back out to you guys because I think we should talk more about this and bring up some different specific topics about it and talk a little bit more in detail about those things. So thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Great to see you all.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.